Yo, what's going on, AP people? We have APUSH review tensions in the 1850s. You know it'll be in the AP exam in some way, shape, or form. Maybe even ask a question. Who knows? I will do my best to prepare you for this section of your test. Okay, we're going to start off talking about the Compromise of 1850, and this is a very important topic that deals with land gained from the Mexican-American War, what is known as the Mexican Cession. Here's a very famous painting from the Compromise of 1850, and you will see front and center the main focus of this painting is my political icon, my political hero, and Abe Lincoln's hero as well, Henry Clay. Okay, 5 parts of the Compromise of 1850. Know all 5 of them. 1. Popular sovereignty in the Mexican Cession. This means that people living in that territory get to decide if it is a slave or a free territory, not politicians. 2. There is to be a more strict Fugitive Slave Act, and this will get the North very upset, but it's going to force Northerners to actively participate in the capture and return of slaves. 3. The slave trade in Washington, D.C. is abolished. Not slavery, just the slave trade. 4. California is admitted as a free state, which will tip the balance in this section of the North of the free states in Congress. And Texas is given $10 million to settle a boundary dispute. Don't let that last section fool you thinking it's not important. Texas was claiming a lot of land, and they were actually threatening to go to war if they didn't get what they wanted. So the U.S. was able to settle that dispute by throwing some money at them. Okay, Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854 is a very important act that is pushed by this guy here, Stephen Douglas, nicknamed the Little Giant. He played a part in the Compromise of 1850 as well, and he is a big believer in popular sovereignty. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act is passed in response to the Gadsden Purchase, that little plot of land in southwestern United States that was purchased in 1852. You may wonder, why is it passed? Well, the North wanted a railroad as well. And remember, the whole purpose of the Gadsden Purchase was for the South to get a railroad. So this idea of popular sovereignty is introduced for Kansas and Nebraska, and the assumption was that Kansas would be a slave state, would become a slave state, and Nebraska would become a free state. Well, this was a little problem for people living in the North, because this overturned the Missouri Compromise or the Compromise of 1820. Both Kansas and Nebraska are above that 3630 line, so they should have been free, but that is not the way it works with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And this black line here, if you were to extend this all the way across, is that line of 3630. So this area here should have been free. Not going to happen. This upsets the North, and many individuals in the North begin not to enforce the fugitive slave law, or more of them begin not to enforce the fugitive slave law. And this is a huge reason for the emergence of the political party, whose platform is the non-extension of slavery into territories. Okay, we're going to have some issues in Kansas as a result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and it's put up to a vote. And the South won, and that's in quotations, the Kansas election, and we'll see why it's in quotations. Well, Free Soilers did not recognize the government. In Lawrence, Kansas, in May of 1856, it was a free soil town that was attacked and burned by pro-slavery forces. And here's a picture depicting the burning of Lawrence. A couple days after that, there is in Congress a senator by the name of Charles Sumner who is caned by a member of the House of Representatives from South Carolina, Preston Brooks. He attacks him brutally with a cane, actually breaks the top of his cane off, and Charles Sumner has to go to Europe and get a lot of medical treatment over there. He's really never the same afterwards. This was within days of the attack on Lawrence. John Brown, who is an abolitionist, is going to be very upset between the burning of Lawrence and then this attack on this abolitionist senator, Charles Sumner. So he believed that slavery was immoral, and it was his job to do God's work, or at least what he thought was God's work. So then we have the Potawatomi Massacre, and he and his followers, mostly his kids, he had like 18 kids or something like that. Many of his sons traveled to Kansas with him. They kill 5 pro-slavery individuals. They actually hack them to pieces in response for the burning of Lawrence and the caning of Charles Sumner. So there's basically a mini civil war going on in Kansas in the 1850s, and this is going to last throughout the Civil War as well. So this is really the prelude to the Civil War here. In 1857, we have one of the most important court cases in United States history. This guy here, Dred Scott, he is a slave, his master dies, and he sues for his freedom. And the Supreme Court, under the leadership of Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, says the following: since Dred Scott was a slave, Scott could not sue in court, so he was not allowed to, much like the Native Americans in the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, were not citizens and they could not sue in court. Slaves were considered property and could not be taken from their owners without due process. That's the Fifth Amendment of the Bill of Rights. And it didn't matter if a territory was free or slave, as slave could not be taken away. So in essence, all these territories now could have slaves, no matter their location. In the impact, this overturned the Missouri Compromise. Again, yes, the Kansas-Nebraska Act did, but this is the final nail in the coffin for the Missouri Compromise. And this leads to a key issue in the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858. Speaking of which, here is Abe Lincoln standing here talking, and here seated next to him is Stephen Douglas. So what were the Lincoln-Douglas debates? Well, they were debates for the Illinois Senate seat in 1858. And keep in mind, in the 1850s, senators were chosen by state legislatures. It's not until the 17th Amendment that citizens of a state get to choose their senator. So Lincoln, who is a Republican, challenged the incumbent, Stephen Douglas, to 7 debates that would happen all over Illinois. There's a very famous debate, and this is called the Freeport Doctrine. Something happens here. Lincoln asks Stephen Douglas the following question. In light of the Dred Scott decision, could a territory vote down slavery if it wanted to? Pretty simple, straightforward question. Now, Stephen Douglas, if he were abiding by the Constitution, should have answered no. Whatever the Supreme Court says is the law of the land. But what he says is essentially yes. This is a very popular multiple choice question. What is the Freeport Doctrine, or what is the impact? Stephen Douglas essentially says that if a territory wants to pass laws to limit the expansion of slavery, they could. This could not have been more of a disaster for Stephen Douglas on a national level. That he alienates himself in the South, and the Democratic Party is essentially split in two. Now, the impact of the debates, Lincoln loses his senatorial seat, but he becomes nationally recognized. And again, the Freeport Doctrine splits Democrats along sectional lines. Northern Democrats are going to stick with Stephen Douglas. Southern Democrats are going to bolt. And this kills Douglas's chance of becoming president in 1860. And when he does run for president, it basically guarantees a Republican is going to win in 1860. Let's flash forward to 1859. John Brown is back, this time in Harpers Ferry, which is an armory in Virginia. So he has a goal here, and he wants to inspire a massive slave rebellion in the South. So he goes to Harpers Ferry, which is located in then Virginia, and Brown and his followers take over the armory. And over the course of about a day or so, 7 people are killed, including a free African American. John Brown is tried, he is found guilty of treason, and he is hanged to death, he and some of his followers. And here he is walking to his hanging. He embraced it, he did not regret anything he did, and he basically said he would do it all over again. The impact of Harper's Ferry, slaves all throughout the South had no idea what was going on. His rebellion was not known to the slaves, so his goal never materialized. The South then becomes convinced that many in the North were like John Brown, and they become very fearful of future attacks, so they're going to clamp down on slavery even more. And this was a huge immediate cause of the Civil War. This is in fact only about a year and a half before the Civil War starts, and only about a year before the Southern states are seceding in 1860 when Lincoln becomes president, or is elected president. Okay, those are the major issues in the 1850s, particularly between the North and the South. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Please, if you have not already, subscribe to my channel. Take a moment, post this on Twitter, Facebook. Let anybody you know who would benefit from watching this, please encourage them to watch this. I really appreciate you guys watching, and have a good day, guys.